The concept of layering and the 100% rule to me is what makes the difference between a fairly polished sounding professional band and just an average high school garage band. So it's a really important thing for kids to know about that are trying to put together music and build arrangements, and even older semi-pros or amateur musicians that are trying to sound better. The idea of layering is just simply that you can't have everything happen at once, or at least it's not always the ideal thing to have everything happen at once, and that possibly if you bring in separate elements at separate times, the listener can follow a narrative, can follow a dramatic unfolding in a song that helps the listener appreciate it and just helps organize what's being perceived. The 100% rule is just a term that sometimes you'll hear used in rehearsals, meaning that if you try to fit a whole bunch of things in a container and it overflows, you've got more than 100% happening. And so it speaks to both timing issues, like when different instruments enter, but it also speaks to things like register. If everybody's playing in the same register, you have oversaturation in one area. So say the guitar and the piano player are all playing in their middle voicing. They might make it sound muddy, where it'd be maybe better to have the guitar up high, and so use the whole spectrum of register. So it's not just a timing thing, but primarily it is. Let's look at an arrangement where you might have your drums start first for a few measures, set up a feel, then the bass might come in later, and then finally the piano, and then the guitar. And then all of those colors are happening later in the arrangement, but at least at first you've only got separate entrances. So that would be one, say, scheme for using layering, and it's very effective and it's used in lots of songs. As I mentioned, if you think of each player contributing a portion of 100% that constitutes the ideal sound, your drums might be 15% of the band's sound. You wouldn't want them to be 100%. You'd want all the instruments to add up to 100%, but you wouldn't want the drums to be 100%, at least all the time. There might be a specific time where it's a drum solo, and they are 100% of what's happening. And then the bass might be 20%, and the piano 25%, and so on. These are just arbitrary amounts, but the point is you wouldn't want to have oversaturation. Every player can't perform the same notes at the same time in the same register all the time, or you've basically got a very uninspired, unimaginative arrangement, and that unfortunately is what too many younger garage bands sound like. Instead, if everybody defines what registral space they'll be playing in, and they employ unique or complementary figurations, you map out the form of the song when different instruments would enter, and you decide how variety will be achieved, then you've got something that's very interesting and compelling for the listener. This principle you can find all through time in all sorts of music. Let's listen to at least part of Pachelbel's canon and listen for that layering of how different instruments come in at different times to complement and add and build an arrangement. So first we have the harpsichord and the cello. Then on top of that, the violin. Now there's a second violin. Notice they're still playing the same duration rate, half notes. And now we're hearing quarter notes as the viola comes in, or eighth notes, I'm sorry. Next we're going to hear 16th notes into this next verse. There we go, 16th notes. And on and on. Okay. All right. The point is that arrangement builds and develops. All of that activity isn't just thrown at the listener at once, and it gives the listener some milestones, some mile markers to to follow the arrangement. Now you have a chart in front of you, but if you didn't have a chart, you would sense that that was happening. Let's go to a completely different kind of music. One of these classic Chicago tunes that I enjoyed listening to when I was in high school, Saturday in the Park by Chicago. But again, listen to the use of layering as this classic tune is presented. Okay, that signature piano introduction. There's the bass with some light drums. And now we have the classic Chicago horn line. Trumpet, trombone, tenor sax, and voice in. The next thing we're going to listen to, right there, vocal harmony, and there is a B3 kind of organ under that. And I could listen to this all day, but we're going to move on. Okay. Yeah, the organ was hard to hear, but there actually in that arrangement is an organ brought in underneath when that vocal harmony happened too. So by number 5 in our chart, we've got a pretty full presentation of all the instruments in the band. Okay, here's a song that actually my own children, I have a son and daughter who are teens, and they played this for me, and I thought, hey, great use of layering, so I thought we'd share this one. Bethany Dillon is a singer, and her song is All I Need. And listen to some unusual instruments like mandolin early in the song. So we have some string instruments, mandolin, guitar first. And now the voice is in. So it's a pretty spare arrangement right now so far.
And there's no one else around. While I'm lying here in bed, you're in my heart, you're in my head. You're all I need. You're all I need. There are a million voices.
There we have drums, electric guitar, and bass all enter. So layering doesn't have to be one instrument at a time. But you got to respect the way this arrangement began very small and then built up.
Make the others disappear. You're all I need. You're all I need.
So where does it go from here? Background vocals, and now there's a shaker adding to the percussion. Okay, got way back, instruments out. But there is, again, a rock organ that may be hard to hear. It's in there, though.
There's a fire in my bones. I'm not afraid to go alone. You're all I need, yeah. You're all I need. The sun on my face.
Okay. Get the idea. So, again, it's a different use of the layering with all of it. In item 3 in our chart here, we have drums, electric guitar, and bass all at once, so it's a big burst of sound in there, but it just makes it more interesting to listen to than if all of those instruments were playing from the very beginning of the song until the very end of the song. It kind of makes the listener callous to what's happening if you've heard it all and it stays the same. Okay, moving on. This one is also a use of layering. The way the orchestral instruments build one ostinato or one repeated melodic and rhythmic pattern on top of another. This song is about 100 and some years old, and it's basically the music that John Williams referenced in his Star Wars trilogy when Darth Vader and the Empire Strikes Back kind of music is sounding. And actually, a lot of people, when they hear it, think it is John Williams' film score from the Star Wars movies, but yet it's Gustav Holst from his suite, The Planets. But listen to one pattern that's layered on top of another pattern, kind of like the Pachelbel canon, in an example of layering. Okay, so we have this low pedal tone strings. Trombone chords are up. Chords move up through the brass. There's also a tam-tam in there, gong. Here's the horns, sort of a major, turns major just for temporary. Okay, now we're going to be building a dissonance. It gets pretty exciting, pretty intense. Okay, again, that's a very famous opening to a piece, and it just is so much more exciting because of the controlled, disciplined way that Holst brings in those different elements, those different layers, one on top of another, building towards that giant unison in the orchestra where we fade it out. The next piece I'd like to look at, Seasons of Love. We'll listen to it, but I'd also like to look at the arrangement even a little bit closer than some of the others we've done. This comes from Jonathan Larson's musical Rent, and probably, in my opinion, the best song in that musical. But one way to do it would be just to listen to it and see what you hear. So let's do that first, and then we'll take a closer look. And I'm not going to go through the table like we've done with the other examples. I'm going to let you sort of chart what you hear. But you might make a chart like this, and in it list the events as they happen, what you're hearing. So let's just listen to an excerpt of Seasons of Love.
$525,600 minutes, 525,000 moments, oh dear. 525,600 minutes. How do you measure a year? In daylights, in sunsets, in midnights, in cups of coffee, in inches, in miles, in laughter and strife. In 525,600 minutes, how do you measure a year in the life? How about love? How about love? How about love? Measuring love. Seasons of love. Seasons of love.
Okay, now let's take a closer look at the arrangement in a program called GarageBand. All right, now here's GarageBand, and we've set it up so that we'll have the instruments, most of the instruments in that Seasons of Love excerpt we heard. The piano, right hand and left hand, are recorded in two different tracks up here at the top. The jazz organ, the sort of Hammond B3 that you heard noodling around, is here. This instrument, Nylon Shimmer, was not in the arrangement we heard. We're using this to represent the voices, the lead vocal, at least. And there was a drum kit and a bass and a lead electric guitar. Now, the reason we're going to look at it in GarageBand is you can look at these bubbles of note activity and basically get a sense of what's happening in terms of the principle of layering. and the 100% rule. These little bubbles here are basically cymbal activity early in the arrangement, but you'll see that the drums don't really come in earnest, keeping time, until about measure 17. And look at this, the bass doesn't even come in until measure 20. And then finally the electric guitar isn't in until 24. So it takes a while for this arrangement to build up, but that's why it works so well. Not everything is happening at once. Let's go ahead and take a look at the playback, and we'll follow it by following what's happening in these bubbles. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so we had our piano, then the organ, just a little atmospheric percussion, but so far just two things happening. No bass yet, no real drums keeping time yet. And that's representing the voice entering in measure 9. Those little organ inserts spice it up a little bit. Okay, now finally the drums keep time right there. Still no bass yet, but it's coming up. And now we have bass. Makes it so much more special when it enters because we waited so long for it. Then here's the build up to the refrain or the chorus. Then the arrangement really pulls back here. Everything drops out except for the piano and organ. And that's basically the excerpt that we listened to in Seasons of Love. What makes this arrangement work so well is that there's a great control of what instruments are presented and when they're presented.